Get ready. This might be the most unfiltered moment we've seen from Trump in a long time. On live TV, he's pressed about inflation and completely loses his composure. You can see the pressure getting to him. He tries to spin it with claims about falling prices and a strong economy, but then makes one critical mistake, and that slip exposes everything he's been hiding about America's real situation.
Inflation is way down. The biggest thing is inflation. The second biggest thing is energy. Energy is way down, and what's also down? Gasoline. Also, the biggest thing is inflation, and it's way down. The reason I don't want to talk about affordability is because everybody knows that it's far less expensive under Trump than it was under sleepy Joe Biden.
Did you catch that? He brushed off the question about affordability, saying he didn't even want to talk about how hard it's become for ordinary Americans to keep up with everyday costs. He insists his government is doing better than Biden's, but the numbers don't lie. According to a new Guardian and Harris poll, 75% of Americans say their monthly expenses have gone up, not down. And an Associated Press NORC survey found nearly half of U.S. adults call grocery prices a major source of stress. So while Trump claims victory over inflation, millions of Americans are still struggling to make ends meet. And just when things couldn't look worse, CNN drops a brand new poll that turns the heat up even more.
And get this, according to the University of Michigan, we are dealing with the worst ever view of current conditions dating all the way back since 1951. This is record-breaking in the way you don't want to be breaking records. And get this, Kate, it is down 30%. Consumer sentiment of current conditions down 30% from January when Donald Trump took office. No bueno.
You can see it too. The country is in serious trouble, and Trump knows it. His confidence is cracking. In this video, we'll uncover the real numbers behind Trump's claims and what top analysts are warning could happen next. It's serious, and every American deserves to know the truth. So make sure to subscribe, share the video, and let's dive in. In early 2025, America's economic narrative sounded reassuring. Inflation rates had fallen from the double digits of recent years, and headlines claimed steady progress toward affordability. According to one measure, the annual inflation rate stood at around 2.3% in April. On the surface, the price rise crisis appeared to be easing. But this is where the illusion begins. A 2.3% headline figure doesn't capture the pain beneath the surface, the slow erosion of purchasing power, the regional differences, the specific categories where things are still wildly out of control. Furthermore, government operations were disrupted. The 2025 federal government shutdown paused or delayed key data releases from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, creating a data fog around just how bad things really were. Meanwhile, President Trump proclaimed that inflation was way down, gasoline and energy were way down, and that costs under his administration were far lower than under sleepy Joe Biden. That message framed the narrative, but the reality told a different story. The illusion of control masked structural problems that were quietly bubbling up. The craziest thing that has happened so far was the reckless tariffs Trump placed on Americans. Because the truth is, the tariffs are not being paid by China, Canada, or India. They are being paid by the American consumers. Even Scott Bessent was unable to explain who pays the tariffs.
Did you remember the question? I'm not sure you did. Who pays tariffs?
It's a very complicated question.
Reclaiming my time. People pay tariffs, right?
No,
Reclaiming my time. You clearly aren't going to answer. I'm not going to waste my time having you go,
But Americans are beginning to realize what is going on, even those who voted for Trump. The numbers tell a bleak story, one that even the White House's optimistic spin can't cover up. Consumer sentiment in the United States has collapsed to its second lowest point since 1978. Signaling a deep and spreading anxiety across the American public. The University of Michigan's latest surveys of consumers show a 6% plunge in November alone, revealing a nation that no longer believes in its economic direction. And the timing couldn't be worse. With the Trump administration's policies driving inflation, layoffs, and spending cuts, the American dream is becoming increasingly unreachable for ordinary families. At the core of the problem lies a fundamental contradiction in Trump's economic strategy. On one hand, his administration points to a booming stock market as proof of prosperity. On the other, It ignores the daily financial struggles of millions of Americans who don't own a single share. Recent data shows just how deep that divide has become. Consumer sentiment rose by 11% among the wealthiest households, those heavily invested in stocks, while middle and lower income groups saw sharp declines. Two very different Americas are now emerging, one inflated by market speculation and another crushed by the rising cost of living. Trump's economic playbook has made this gap wider than ever. It celebrates Wall Street while leaving Main Street behind, a system built to please investors, not protect ordinary citizens. And the numbers make that reality impossible to hide.
More than 3 in 5 Americans, 61%, who say that Trump's policies have worsened economic conditions in America. How about worsened your own finances? Again, we're dealing with a majority here. 51% of Americans say that Trump's policies have worsened your own finances.
To understand how this crisis deepened, we must look at the mechanics of Trump's policies. His administration's approach to inflation has been largely rhetorical rather than structural. Tariffs on imported goods have raised prices for consumers without meaningfully reshoring jobs. Corporate tax cuts, once sold as a way to boost wages and productivity, have instead fueled stock buybacks and executive bonuses. Meanwhile, looming cuts to food aid and higher insurance premiums threaten to strip away the last safety nets for struggling families. The cumulative effect is an economy that feels prosperous only on paper. While its real foundation, consumer confidence and purchasing power, is eroding fast. Even the government shutdown has turned into a self-inflicted wound. Surveys show that Americans now fear the political standoff will have serious consequences for the economy. Federal workers are lining up for food donations, contractors are losing pay, and uncertainty is freezing business decisions. Even SBA loans, worth billions of dollars that could have supported small businesses, are now on hold. Yet the administration shows little urgency. The lack of a coherent fiscal strategy, combined with constant political brinkmanship, has left investors nervous and citizens exhausted. This isn't just poor governance, it's economic sabotage disguised as strength. So why is this happening? The answer comes down to reckless policy choices, trade wars, supply disruptions, and a refusal to take responsibility. First, the tariffs. The Trump administration reinstated old ones, threatened new ones, and reignited global trade tensions. Analysts at the International Monetary Fund, IMF, warned that these trade moves were worsening the U.S. inflation risk. One top official said tariffs could push U.S. inflation to 3.5 to 4%. The second cause is the government shutdown's effect. When the Bureau of Labor Statistics paused or delayed data collection, the transparency of economic indicators was reduced. That slows policy response and hides the full severity of problems. Let's take a moment to look at what happened in August 2025. Washington sent shockwaves through the financial world when President Donald Trump abruptly fired Bureau of Labor Statistics BLS Commissioner Erica McIntyre. This was a move that exposed just how desperate Washington had become in hiding the true situation of the U.S. economy. The BLS isn't just another government agency. It's the nation's trusted referee for tracking inflation, jobs, and wages. When Trump accused Commissioner Erica McIntyre of rigging the numbers after a weak jobs report and major downward revisions, the backlash was immediate. But her dismissal went far beyond political theater. It raised a far more serious question. Can the world still trust the data guiding the largest economy on Earth? And the timing couldn't have been worse. The BLS produces the Consumer Price Index, the single most important measure of inflation in the United States. That one figure influences trillions of dollars in government bonds, sets Social Security adjustments, and shapes Federal Reserve decisions on interest rates. So when Trump abruptly fired the commissioner, markets didn't just see a staffing change. They saw a potential attack on the integrity of U.S. economic data itself. Investors began to worry that political interference was creeping into the system, that the numbers might soon serve power, not truth. And those fears quickly found a target: the $2.1 trillion market for Treasury inflation-protected securities, or TIPS. These bonds are designed to protect investors from inflation by adjusting returns according to CPI readings. But if the CPI itself becomes unreliable, the entire foundation of that market begins to shake. traders started demanding higher risk premiums, pricing in the possibility that official inflation data might no longer reflect reality. Confidence, the invisible currency that keeps the financial system stable, suddenly looked fragile. Despite the White House's insistence that the economy is resilient, growing evidence suggests the United States is teetering dangerously close to a recession. And in some sectors, it may already be there. The warning signs are unmistakable. Consumer confidence has collapsed, manufacturing has contracted for most of the year, and unemployment claims are creeping upward even as inflation continues to bite into household budgets. While official GDP figures still show sluggish growth, the underlying reality is that several pillars of the economy are quietly shrinking. Manufacturing, which is a trusted measure of economic health, is one of the hardest hit sectors. The Institute for Supply Management's index has remained below the critical 50 mark for consecutive months, signaling contraction. Orders for new equipment and exports are down, reflecting weakened global demand and the ripple effects of Trump's renewed tariffs on foreign goods. Factory layoffs have increased, particularly in the automotive and electronics industries, where input costs have surged due to disrupted supply chains and trade uncertainties. For thousands of workers across the Midwest and South, the Made in America promise is turning into a painful mirage of job cuts and idle assembly lines. Retail is showing similar distress. Despite steady holiday discounts and consumer incentives, spending is slowing sharply as Americans face higher prices for essentials. Credit card debt has hit record highs, and delinquency rates are rising, a sign that many households are struggling to keep up with elevated living costs. Analysts at Moody's warn that this pattern mirrors the early stages of past recessions, where consumer exhaustion precedes a broader economic downturn. The housing sector, another vital barometer, has also cooled. High mortgage rates, hovering around 2-decade highs, have frozen much of the market, pushing both sales and construction activity into decline. Meanwhile, corporate profits are thinning outside of a few tech giants. Small businesses, especially in logistics, construction, and hospitality, report declining revenues and growing difficulties securing credit. Lending standards have tightened as banks brace for higher defaults, reflecting a feedback loop typical of pre-recession conditions. Although the Trump administration continues to tout strong stock performance as proof of vitality, that optimism hides the fractures underneath. Financial markets are often the last to reflect real-world pain. The reality on Main Street is that growth has stalled in critical sectors, consumer spending is weakening, and the once booming job market is showing cracks. By all economic logic, recession isn't just a possibility. Parts of the economy are already living it. There's now clear evidence that officials inside the Federal Reserve and Trump's own administration, including Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, are openly pointing fingers at each other over the growing threat of a U.S. recession. The cracks are showing, and even Bessent himself has admitted that parts of the American economy are already in recession. On one side, President Trump has turned his frustration toward the Fed, accusing it of failing to manage interest rates and stabilize the economy. After a weak jobs report, he complained that Jerome Powell was always too late, insisting that rates should have been cut long ago. At a rally in Michigan, he doubled down, saying, "I have a Fed person who is not really doing a good job." Inside his administration, the pressure is mounting. Officials close to Trump are urging Powell to act aggressively to rescue the housing market. Bessent warned that high interest rates may have already pushed sectors of the economy, especially housing, into a recession, and blamed the Fed for creating distributional problems through its policies. Meanwhile, Fed Governor Stephen Moran, another Trump-aligned figure, cautioned that keeping policy tight for too long could cause the Fed itself to trigger the very recession it's trying to prevent. In short, Trump's camp claims the Fed has mismanaged rates and deepened the downturn. The Fed, in turn, argues that Trump's trade wars and reckless fiscal policies have made its job nearly impossible. The result is an open blame game at the highest levels of power, a sign that the coming crisis isn't just about economics, but about leadership, accountability, and trust. And as the finger-pointing continues, one thing is clear: the illusion of control is fading. Markets are nervous, confidence is crumbling, and the truth is catching up to Trump's narrative. Fast. We'll keep tracking every move and every signal as this unfolds. Make sure you're subscribed to stay ahead. Because what's coming next could redefine the U.S. economy.